Welcome to the Rotary Club of Tulsa, and a very special welcome to the Rotarians here from the Rotary Club of Oklahoma City. To open our meeting today, our invocation will be given by past President Rod Sands, song and pledge by Jerry Murator. Tom Wolf is not on the piano today, and we don't know where Tom is, but hope he's doing well. Visitor introductions by Claudette Rogers.
Let's bow our heads in prayer, please. Heavenly Creator, we gather on this beautiful first day of spring to foster our Rotary fellowship and to renew our ideals of service, truth, and understanding. Please bless the food we have just enjoyed and those that prepared it for us. We are thankful for our many blessings. We are grateful for our speaker today and his leadership with the revitalization of his city and a spirit of collaboration and innovation. Please bless his journey with continued success through the next chapters of his life story. We acknowledge your divine presence, asking for your blessings and guidance for our government leaders at all levels as they struggle to find the right path towards statesmanship, to shape policies promoting the public good while they travel through the rubble of partisanship, entitlements, and self-interest. Please help each of us shed negative impacts of the past, the feelings and experiences of yesterday. Like this spring day, recharge, rekindle, and renew our enterprising spirits for greater things to come. Please help us with our determination to live good lives, to learn to live connected in harmony with all the people in our small world. May goodness flourish. Amen.
I was going to teach you guys a little Italian. There's a word called a cappella, which means without your hat, I think. But in the spirit of Rotary, our good Rotarian friend, Dr. Hartman, is going to fill in on piano, and we're going to sing God Bless America, followed by the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And since I got pressed into duty, I still have Crescendo tickets for Saturday night.
I want to welcome everyone today to Rotary Club of Tulsa, whose guest list is larger than a lot of the Rotary clubs around town. So just settle back. First of all, I'd like to introduce our guests and their visiting and their host Rotarians. I noticed that we have a couple of young ones today, so future Rotarians in our midst. Just please stand, and then we'll clap applause after everyone's been introduced. Jerry Bender is a guest of Chuck Jordan. Savannah Neff is a guest of Jack McGlumpy. Dr. Sam Adler is with a Crescendo, and I think he came with Burl Watson. Thank you. Stephanie Cameron, guest of Paula Wood. David Momper, guest of Kathy Gurrell. Jason Heilman, guest of Michael Manning. Justin Johnson, guest of David Wagner. Visiting Rotarians, Joel Cousins from Muskogee. I'm sorry, and say hi. Jarl Johnson from Park Cities, Dallas. Wayne Schwanet from Bixby. Haven't seen you in a while. Harlan Pinkerton from Sand Springs. Chris Bench from Sand Springs, who I understand is going to become a member of our Rotary Club. I'm not supposed to say that. And now for the good list of our honored friends from just down the street in Oklahoma City. So if all of you would please stand and remain standing when I say your names, and then we'll give you a great big high Rotarian when we get through. Terry Cooper, Steve Kime, David Battles, Robert Clemens, Mary Jane Calvey, Steve Brooks, Tony Shin, and I have a B. Bowden, so I'm not sure what your first name, Bill, maybe? General. Oh, great. Oops, sorry. Ray Shake, Hans Thun, Marion Payton, who is, I understand, your next president. Congratulations. Jim Finch, Bob Hammock, Karen Wicker, Robert Zahn, Dr. Gail Hobson, and Dr. Frieda Deskin. Welcome, visiting Rotarians. Thank you. Come back and see us.
Thank you, Claudette. Our Rotary sponsor this week is Doug Collins with Collins & Associates. We encourage you to do business with our fellow Rotarians. Please join me in thanking today's sponsor and all of our volunteers. We are most pleased to have with us today Rotarians from the third largest Rotary Club in the world, the Rotary Club of Oklahoma City. We have a great tradition going back to when John Johnson was president of our club and Jim Daniels was president of Oklahoma City Club, and the first meetings were in Stroud, and last year was the first year for me to go to Oklahoma City, and we've had this home and home series continuing for about 15 years now. Thank you, Oklahoma City Club President Marion Payton, for joining us today. Please stand. And all of the Oklahoma City Rotarians, please stand one more time and be recognized. Thank you for coming today. Thanks also to Tony Shin with the Oklahoma City Club and Melissa Clark with our club for organizing today's visit. And earlier this morning, we had a tour of the AHA Center, the Hardesty Arts Center in the Brady District. On a sad note, we extend condolences to Steve Davis's family. As you may have heard, Steve died in a plane crash on Sunday. Just last week, we had Steve here to announce Adrian Peterson is our Henry P. Iva 2013 male honoree. Steve's pastor said it best about the former OU quarterback great. Steve's life was cut short, but he will leave a legacy. A memorial service will be held on Monday, March 25th at 1 o'clock at First Baptist Church downtown. Please keep his family in your prayers. We have an MSNI workday coming up on Saturday, March the 8th from 8 until noon. This is a great time to get your children, grandchildren to volunteer, and they'll get credit for their service hours. We're going to be inventorying our medical supplies. Please contact Judge Peterson if you can help. On Wednesday, April 3rd, we will not be meeting here. We will be meeting at Celia Clinton Elementary. Sheets are on your table to sign up so we can get an accurate count for the box lunches. Look for Katie Johnson in the lobby for the students' wish list, so when you attend the meeting, you can bring some school supplies with you. For more information, contact our committee chair, Mark Short. Also on your table are sign-ups for hosts for our fireside meetings. These are going to be the week of tax day, April 15th through the 18th, and if you're interested in hosting a fireside meeting in your home, please contact our chair, Marty Alexander. We have one committee meeting today. Club Foundation Grants will be meeting in room 233. Did they get that up there? Next, past president Corey Nickerson for a big announcement.
Well, the big announcement is the fact that since this is Crescendo Week, the list of things I've forgotten to do is now longer than the list of things I have accomplished. One of the things I forgot to do was alert the committee that, yes, we do have a committee meeting today, right after Rotary. We'll take room 231 unless it's booked, so plan to be there, all of you Crescendo committee members. In 1842, the French playwright Balzac did a marketing ploy. He had a play opening at the Odeon in Paris, and he put out the word that there was a sold-out crowd in anticipation that people would show up just to see what all the buzz was about. It didn't work. Everybody stayed home figuring that the place was sold out. Therefore, Crescendo Music Awards is not yet sold out. We still have some tickets. If you want a ticket for Saturday night's finals concert, $25 for adults, 5 tickets for $100, 6 or more, $15 a piece. That means you can buy 6 for less than you can buy 5. We'll help you with the math on that. Right now, I'd like to ask Joseph Bias and Dr. Samuel Adler, a special guest, to come forward. Joseph has a presentation to make.
Dr. Samuel Adler has been a part of the Crescendo Music Awards family for over 7 years, and we want to honor him today with a special citation which reads as follows. Whereas Dr. Samuel Adler has served as a judge for the International Crescendo Music Awards in 2006, 2007, 2010, and now this year, 2013, and has been a highly valued member of the advisory panel for 7 years. Whereas Dr. Adler has composed over 400 published works in all media and numerous choral music and song. Whereas Dr. Adler composed his first violin concerto in celebration of the 15th International Crescendo Music Awards competition. And whereas Dr. Adler is the author of 3 highly regarded pedagogical studies in conducting, sight singing, and orchestration. And whereas Dr. Adler has been a celebrated professor of music at the Eastman and Juilliard Schools of Music. And whereas Dr. Adler has dedicated his life to the training, instruction, and career development of young musical artists and has been an enthusiastic supporter of the Rotary Club of Tulsa's International Crescendo Music Awards, we confer upon him this 20th day of March 2013 the title Ambassador of Music with all rights, privileges, and honors thereunto pertaining. Dr.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was mentioned that I was a professor at the Eastman School, which is part of the University of Rochester. And I need to tell you a story that happened to me because everybody, no matter what discipline at the university, had to serve on the university senate. And my first time there, I sat next to a man who had mathematics as his discipline, and his name was Fritz von Lobkowitz. And I said to him, gee, you have a famous name. He said, you must be from the Eastman School. I said, yes. You see, Fritz von Lobkowitz was the great-great-great-grandson of the famous Lobkowitz, who was Beethoven's patron. And he knew why he wanted to be his patron, because that was instant immortality. Well, I think this Rotary Club has instant immortality because of the Crescendo Awards. Because always, wherever I go, and they mention the Crescendo Awards, they also mention that it's sponsored by you, the Rotary Club of Tulsa. And you ought to be very proud of that, because it's encouraging hundreds and hundreds of music students throughout this country and eventually throughout the world. Thank you very much for your support.
Crescendo committee members, remember to hang on to your badges. You're going to need them for identification this weekend. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. Next, Trey Walling with an IBA announcement.
Good afternoon, fellow Rotarians, and welcome to our friends from Oklahoma City as well as our distinguished guests. Today I'm here to speak to you a little bit, very briefly, about the 2013 IBA Awards. We do still have tables and individual tickets available. our friends from Oklahoma City, I highly encourage you to join us on June 3rd for our 20th anniversary of the 2013 IBO Awards. When we introduced our female recipient, Swin Cash, a couple of weeks ago, we unfortunately ran out of time and did not have the opportunity to run her video. So we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But I want to hit on the huge lineup we have coming. So our keynote speaker, Coach John Calipari from the University of Kentucky, one of the winningest basketball coaches in the modern era of basketball. Swin Cash, our female recipient, as well as the incomparable Adrian Peterson, or AD, from the University of Oklahoma and now Minnesota Vikings All-Pro running back. Now, back to Swin Cash. She is a very distinguished athlete in her own right. She's a two-time Olympian, two-time NCAA women's basketball champion. She is a NCAA women's tournament MVP, a two-time WNBA champion, and an WNBA MVP as well. So a very accomplished athlete within her own right and a tremendous citizen aside from her career as a professional basketballer. So if we can go ahead and run that clip, I encourage everyone to join us on June 3rd. Like I said, individual tickets available, $175 and up. Thank you.
Thank you, Trey. Our Sergeant at Arms, David Downing, is not here this week. He's still completing his March Madness bracket, and he'll be back next week. Our Rotarian of the Day today is Mayor Dewey Bartlett. Mayor Bartlett is the 39th mayor of the city of Tulsa, a native Tulsan. He's a graduate of Bishop Kelly High School, received his accounting degree from Regis University, and his MBA degree from SMU. He has been president of Tulsa-based Keener Oil and Gas since 1994. He is a former Tulsa City Councilor, former chair of the Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, and served on the Tulsa Airport Authority. He became an honorary member of our club in January 2010. Please welcome Rotarian of the Day, the mayor of the city of Tulsa, Dewey Bartlett.
Good afternoon. And certainly to our good friends from Oklahoma City, welcome once again to Tulsa, and I hope you really enjoyed getting to see the AHA Arts Center that we've recently opened up. It's a great, great place. I'd also say that the Brady District and the downtown area, that the buzz that we're experiencing there has been captured very well in a video, 8-minute video that we just produced in the mayor's office, and if anybody would like to see a copy of that, we can give you a link. And my press secretary, who has a camera in his hand, will stand up. And if you give him your card, he'll send you the link. So I think you'd like to see it. It's very, very interesting. Well, we're very fortunate to have the mayor of Oklahoma City, my good friend Mick Cornett, here to speak to us today. He is a great example of the success that our city emulates, would like to see, but he's such a great ambassador for the state of Oklahoma, and certainly for the mayors of this great country. What he has accomplished in his third term now, of expressing what we as mayors, but what we as Oklahomans and what he as an Oklahoma Cityan has accomplished in his career is pretty incredible. The list of individual awards and honors are everything from his participants in urban design, health, sports, arts recognition. Newsweek named him one of the 5 most innovative mayors in the United States. Governing Magazine named him the Public Official of the Year. A London-based organization that studies mayors and their work listed him as the 2nd best mayor in the world. 2nd best in the world. Not bad. He's only the 4th mayor in the Oklahoma City's history to be elected to 3 terms. One of the reasons I believe that Oklahoma City's success is they've had consistency in the leadership of their community. They have a good habit of re-electing mayors for several terms. She knows how I ease that in? Mick has been a real upfront champion for infrastructure and health. Oklahoma City is rebuilding its streets. We all know of the MAPS projects and the success it's had in Bricktown, but especially for their public school system. That's where it really all started, was the public school system, and how they were able to integrate a rebuilding of that system, and that parlayed into what we're seeing now in the downtown area in Bricktown, and the huge influx of people that are now living downtown. They're so far down the road in that accomplishment. I won't say we're close behind, Mayor, but we're there. We're coming to that. But the trails projects, the river development they've had, the infrastructure that they are putting has dramatically reshaped Oklahoma City. Why the Thunder didn't win last night, I don't know. But what a great, great asset that they've had. A National Basketball Association team in Oklahoma City, the Oklahoma Thunder. Isn't that great? Well, Mick he's a graduate of the University of Oklahoma in journalism. He's also a graduate of New York University, got an MBA there. He's best known for putting Oklahoma City on a diet that still today he espouses that, and I think it's 1 million pounds that was lost garnered worldwide recognition, and it is still there. Well, something is certainly working. The Kauffman Foundation named Oklahoma City as the most entrepreneurial city in the country with the most startups per capita. That is a real statement for the future of that great metropolitan city. Would you please welcome my good friend, Mick Cornett.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It is an honor to be here, as always. I always look forward to this every other year visit. And I'm always thinking, well, I don't know that I can tell them anything I didn't tell them last time. And I also noticed that our Oklahoma City group this year spread out. Typically, they huddle together. They have like 2 tables, but this time they've covered all the exits in case I try to make a run for it. They're going to tackle me. Mayor Bartlett and I have had the opportunity over the last few years to represent the state nationally. And I can recall when we were in New York doing media, and you know, the New York media can ask some tough questions. And every time they would ask something about the state's economy, specific about the energy industry, I would just look over at him. And I tell you, it was a flawless explanation of the specific business model that the question pertained to. And I've never heard anyone defend energy in general and Oklahoma's economy better than you did on that particular trip. So you were represented well. The entire state was represented well by Mayor Bartlett's efforts. I thought I would spend a little bit of our time today talking about Oklahoma City's kind of unique experiences. Oklahoma City's history is kind of a trail of tears and successes. And in some ways, I think that journey has shaped the city that now espouses one of the top economies in the country, maybe the best economy of any large metropolitan city in the United States. But as you know, you go back in Oklahoma City's history, there's a lot of unique elements. For instance, you all are probably aware of the land run that got Oklahoma City started. I mean, literally, the population of Oklahoma City went from 0 to 10,000 in one day. And I think our planning department is still paying for that to some extent. You know, that wasn't the federal government's best idea. Most of the properties seem to have multiple owners. 10 years later, we still had 10,000 people, and I suspect it was a different 10,000 people in many regards. But on that first day, the citizens got together and they elected a mayor, and then they shot him. Now, I've never really thought that was all that funny. But I now see what type of crowd I'm dealing with here. The citizens got together the second day and started complaining there wasn't enough parking in Bricktown. And we're still working on that. But the population went through an expansive growth between 1900 and 1910. 10,000 people at the turn of the century, 90,000 people by 1910. Can you imagine the construction that took place in that boom time era? And there are a few pictures of the city in that era, and indeed, the engineering of the day allowed the construction of 10 to 12-story buildings, and they're just sprouting up all over Oklahoma City. The population and the economy, though, of Oklahoma City then started to reflect the energy industry and the agricultural industry. We seem to have been a state, and specifically in Oklahoma City, a city whose economy revolved around commodities. It may have been the price of cotton 100 years ago, eventually a bushel of wheat, and certainly a barrel of oil and a unit of natural gas. And those commodities through our history have determined to some extent the growth patterns and the pure economic growth in general of the Oklahoma City economy. And when you look back to Oklahoma's economy before oil was discovered in the city, it was much, much different. But oil was discovered at Southeast 59th and Bryant, to be specific, in 1928. And if you've seen pictures of Oklahoma City in the 1940s and 50s, you know it's just a sea of oil derricks. As Oklahoma City's economy just continued to revolve around what seemed to be kind of an endless source of economic prosperity. And like most of Oklahoma, our economy started to reflect the energy industry. And when things were good, our economy was good. And when things were bad, our economy was bad. And if you'll recall back in the 1970s, there was the perception that was penetrating much of America and indeed the world that we were running out of energy, that the supply of oil and the supply of natural gas was finally about to be exhausted. How many of you remember the gas lines in 1974? Okay, most of you. I remember because I turned 16 in 1974. And I remember thinking, great, I finally get old enough to drive a car and the world runs out of gas. My luck. The president was wearing sweaters around the White House because he was trying to conserve. He was trying to establish the image that there wasn't that much oil and natural gas left and we all needed to conserve. OPEC had established a cartel, gas prices were going up, and if we knew one thing, we knew it well, and that was that the price of energy was never going to retreat. I mean, it was on an upward trend, and it was not going to change. And the price of energy went from $10 to $15 to quickly to $20 and to $25 and to $30, and Oklahoma City's economy was going through the roof. If you knew someone in Oklahoma City in 1980, chances are they had a plane. They may not have had a plan, but they had a plane. You remember that commercial on television? If you don't have an oil well, get one. It was the culture of the day. And then, as we know, on July 5th, 1982, it all changed. Now, it didn't change overnight, but it felt like it changed overnight. I can remember I was in the television news business on that particular day, and the reporters didn't know what to do. Banks don't close. Banks hadn't closed in generations. Why are these people lined up outside? We didn't know how to cover such a catastrophic event. And we thought 1982 was bad, and somehow 1983 would be better, and it was worse. And then we knew that 1984 would be better, and it was worse. And we knew 1985 would be better. It wasn't. 1986 was probably the worst year of all. Our economy had spiraled downward and downward and downward. And looking back, the impact of that economic calamity can be seen today in Oklahoma City, and largely through a lost generation of talent. If you're my age and you got an advanced degree and came back to college and came back to Oklahoma in the 1980s, chances are there was not a job for you in Oklahoma City. Probably had a better chance of getting a job in Tulsa, but more likely you're in Dallas today or Houston or New York or Tokyo. But we lost a generation of talent when we had the economic impact of the 1980s. And in Oklahoma City, I suspect that the economic challenges were greater than just about anywhere around. And if you go back to the late 1980s, Oklahoma City's leadership of the day was trying to develop some traction. I mean, they were trying to do virtually anything they could to try and get an economy going again. And in 1987, we elected a mayor named Ron Norick. And Ron Norick was a businessman who had been the son of a mayor, and he knew that his chief job was to create jobs. You know, you can't have much of a quality of life if you don't have a job. And jobs were shrinking, and the jobs we had were underperforming. And so when the opportunity for a United Airlines maintenance facility came along, Oklahoma City took attention. I don't know how many of you remember this opportunity, but it was the economic development Goliath of the day. It was going to deliver an economic impact annually of $700 to $800 million. It was going to be at least 5,000 jobs, maybe 8,000 jobs. The average wage much higher than the average wage in Oklahoma City. And with this opportunity on the table, cities all over the country took notice. Denver was planning its airport at the time. They wanted it really bad. Louisville was stepping forward, but also bigger cities like Chicago, Seattle. An opportunity like this did not come along very often, and Oklahoma City's leadership knew it. The state put together an incredible incentive package to try and help Oklahoma City's leadership. The state came up with a financial incentive package of $100 million plus for Oklahoma City to help land this United Airlines facility. And thinking that might not be enough, Ron Norick went to the voters with an incredibly brave idea. He said, I'm going to present to you an opportunity to tax yourself, a penny on the dollar, and we're going to build this facility for United Airlines. We're going to build it for them if they'll come. The incentive package will be $40 million that we'll construct this maintenance facility, and then we'll lease it back to them for whatever we can get. But the idea is just to bring them here and create these jobs. And so you can imagine with an incentive package now, what, $140 million? Oklahoma starts rising to the top of the list of cities that are under consideration for that United Airlines plant. And on a fateful day, when just a handful of cities were still thinking they had a chance, the CEO of United Airlines announced that the maintenance facility would be built in Indianapolis. And it took Oklahoma City's leadership by surprise. The level of disappointment can hardly be explained today. They had put over a year's worth of effort into making this presentation that Oklahoma City was the best place for United Airlines to locate. And Mayor Norick, to his credit, stood up, called a press conference, announced the disappointing news, but then he called the CEO of United Airlines and said, you got to help us. We got to understand this. We know our incentive package was better than everybody else's. And the CEO didn't really want to talk about the parameters that they used to make that decision. He just said, you all are the nicest people we met. You're the most organized. We could tell you wanted it bad. It just didn't work out. We decided to go elsewhere. And Mayor Norick wouldn't stop there. He said, no, you've got to tell us specifically where we went wrong. And so the CEO of United said, okay, here's what happened. We sent a group of executives into Oklahoma City and their spouses. And they came back and told us what it was like. And at the end of the day, we couldn't imagine our employees living there. Wow. That was a kick in the teeth. That was the truth from Fortune 500 companies. The second thing Mayor Norick did was he went to Indianapolis. Now, I like to point out he didn't move there. Although, at this stage, he may have wanted to. It was a rocky time to be the mayor of Oklahoma City. He went to Indianapolis, though, and he looked around, and what he saw was a city that had invested in quality of life amenities. They had tried to create a place where people wanted to live, and businesses were wanting to locate there. They had built arenas, and sports teams came. It was a fairly new concept. Economic development was becoming the result of the quality of life of the community. You see, up until that time, people chased jobs. All of a sudden, jobs were chasing people, and Mayor Norick saw that. He also noted that the citizens of Oklahoma City passed a tax for corporate America to bring in jobs. And what he took from that is they're willing to invest in something better. And so he went back to the drawing board, spent another year of consensus building, and came up with what we now know as MAPS. 9 projects to be funded by a penny on the dollar sales tax over 5 years. Now, after the 1 year of planning and calling for the election, the citizens went to the polls and it barely passed. It got 54% of the vote. But interestingly, you cannot find anyone in Oklahoma City who now admits they voted against it, because it changed everything. The early days of MAPS, though, were rocky. A year after the election had passed, nothing had been built. Deadlines were already not being met. Budgets were being exceeded. If you look back and you're honest about it, if the citizens of Oklahoma City had a chance to vote again, they probably would have voted it right back out. There was more controversy around MAPS a year or 2 years into it than you can possibly imagine. It wasn't going well. We had a citizens advisory board that seemed to have turned on the mayor. The mayor at a city council meeting said, well, the advisory board needs to keep its mouth shut. I mean, when your citizen oversight committee is arguing with city hall leadership, that's not a good scenario to try and build support for a public initiative. But nonetheless, that's where the city was in 1995. And then we were struck with the largest act of domestic terrorism in United States history. 168 people murdered in downtown Oklahoma City with a truck bomb. So now you take this generation of people that have already been through the economic calamity, had been presented with an idea that were told had some light at the end of the tunnel, and you put in the emotional impact of the most incredible mass murder anyone could possibly imagine. And looking back with 18 years hindsight to the way that Oklahoma City reacted to the bombing, I think a couple of things are starting to become clear. First of all, emotionally, when someone does something to you or your city like that, you want to hate somebody. Your instinct is to want to get the person or persons that did that. And while you're building this hatred, you're also in your mind trying to come up with some sort of conclusion about what sort of people this must be. And you want them to be different from you. You want them to live somewhere else. You want them to have a different color of skin. You want them to have a different God. You don't want them to have any similarities to you. But what we learned was that the bomb was put together by 2 guys who drove down from Kansas. Well, you can't hate Kansas. I mean, that's not logical. We know people from Kansas. This isn't symbolic of them. And so it's almost as if the fact that we couldn't really blame this entity who wasn't like us, it's almost as if it turned back on us and we just asked ourselves, why us? Why were we the victims of something like this that obviously could have happened anywhere? And it's almost as if at that moment, the citizens of Oklahoma City reached down, grabbed hands, and pulled each other up and said, okay, no one's going to separate us again. Within short time, the MAPS projects start opening up. The first one was the ballpark, April of 1998. And it's almost as if you can go back in time and draw, that's the beginning of Oklahoma City's popularity, of its swagger. It was the first time we had something really to be proud of. In looking back, it was really just a ballpark. But what it represented to us was really the first thing our generation had ever had to be proud of in Oklahoma City, something you might invite a family or friend from other parts of the country to come see. And we also knew that there was more really cool stuff coming. We put a canal through the entertainment district. We improved our performing arts center. We built a new library downtown. We improved our facilities at the horse shows. We had a transportation element. We built a new basketball arena. We even put water in the river. Now in Tulsa, that may not sound like such a novel idea, but in Oklahoma City, I mean, my generation grew up with this big ditch that the grown-ups called the river. And upon further discussion, what you learned was back in 1923, the river flooded twice. It flooded once in the spring, and it flooded again in the fall. And the civic leadership of Oklahoma City went to the Corps of Engineers, threw its hands up and said, "You've got to help us. You've got to make sure this river never floods again." Well, they did. They took all the water out of our river. The city of Oklahoma City had a line item in its budget to mow the river twice a year. Because it could catch on fire. But here with MAPS was the opportunity to build 3 low water dams and really create what are river lakes. And believe me, when we put water in the river, even if nobody ever built anything alongside of it, we were satisfied. There was water in it. You might go fishing there. There might be a boat someday. But even if there's not, when you drove by, at least there was water in the river. It was mind-blowing for people in Oklahoma City. Well, along the way, we changed mayors. Kirk Humphreys comes to office. And with all these investments in central Oklahoma City, there was this expectation that the private sector was going to react big time. And indeed, there were elements of that. There were people starting to build stuff that probably wouldn't have been built if the MAPS projects hadn't been built earlier. But in a now famous conversation with an assistant city manager, the mayor had to come to one big conclusion, because when he was talking about why isn't downtown being repopulated, why aren't people moving downtown, and the assistant city manager turned to the mayor and said, "Mayor, you can pave those streets with gold, but unless you fix the schools, nobody's moving downtown." That was the sad truth. You see, Oklahoma City's inner city school district in the 1990s had completely bankrupt its political reputation. The school board could not pass a bond issue to save its life. And the deferred maintenance kept piling up. Somebody did the math and decided that even if they pass every bond issue from here on out, they'll never catch up. They'll never catch up to the deferred maintenance issues in that inner city district. The leadership of the community, both the elected officials and the business community, had distanced itself from the school board. No one wanted to be connected with such a disastrous situation. And finally, it took Mayor Humphreys and the courage of the business community to realize, look, our city's not going to go forward until we fix the image and the education that's going on in that school district. It's holding the city back. We can't ignore it any longer. We're going to have to put our arms around it and figure out a way to make this change. And so he came up with a concept we now know as MAPS for Kids, a very complicated example, I would say political genius, of getting 24 school districts to come together in the Oklahoma City metro area, create a level of taxation that spent almost all the money in the inner city district, $700 million in all, to rebuild or refurbish every single building in that inner city district, all 75 buildings over a 7-year funding plan. A new round of technology, a new round of buses that I'll point out we purchased in Tulsa, $18 million worth of buses. And indeed, the image of the school district started to change. But I remember one poignant day when we found out that in working on one of the school buildings, we took down some lockers. And when we took down the lockers, the wall fell in. The lockers were holding up the walls in a school where we had our kids. That's pretty scary in retrospect. Then in 2004, in a rare act of almost civil disobedience, the citizens elected me mayor. And as I become the mayor of this city, all of a sudden, Oklahoma City is starting to get noticed. Now, you may remember this is about the time that magazines and websites started to come out with all these lists. Best city to do this, best city to do that. And all of a sudden, Oklahoma City was appearing on these lists. And I remember thinking how cool this was. Now, we weren't number one on these lists. But you know, it would be like best place to get a job, best place to start a business, best downtown. A lot of lists that you'd really like to see your city on. And Oklahoma City was on the list. And so I would be out talking to groups like this, or really anywhere in the country that I could, to start talking about Oklahoma City's emergence as a world-class whatever. And then came out the list of the most obese cities in the country. And there we were. And I think it's interesting that usually when you show up on one of the lists that you don't want to be on, usually when that happens, the elected officials and the business leadership of that community will start to discredit the organization that created the list. They'll talk about how the data that was collected was really incorrect, or it was misleading, or there's other things to consider. You know, you get real defensive and you start trying to point out about why it's not really as true as the media entity indicates. But I thought it was interesting in Oklahoma City, when we were put on the list of the most obese cities in the country, we just kind of looked at each other and went, I bet that's right. I mean, we just were afraid to talk about it. But all you had to do was look around or look at the next generation, and you could see that our kids were just exhibiting the same sort of unhealthy behaviors. And so it was about that time that I got on the scales. And I remember I weighed about 220 pounds. And I went to this government website, and I typed in my height. And I cheated about a ½ inch. And then I typed in my weight, and I pushed enter, and it came back obese. And I remember thinking, what a stupid website. I'm not obese. I would know if I was obese. And then I started getting honest with myself, and I realized that my entire adult life had this struggle with weight loss, and I would gain like 2 or 3 pounds a year. And then about every 10 years, I would take off 20 or 30 pounds, and then I would start over again. And I had this huge closet full of clothes. I could only wear 1/3 of them at any one time, but my wardrobe kind of depicted whether I had this skinny clothes, or the medium clothes, or the fat clothes. Only I could figure out what to wear on a particular day. But I realized the problem had become that I wasn't gaining 2 or 3 pounds a year anymore. As mayor, I was gaining 10 pounds a year, because everybody wants to feed the mayor. And the mayor was eating. And I realized that if I was mayor very long, I was going to be a really large mayor. So I merely quit eating as much. I'd always exercised, so that really wasn't my problem. But I cut down my calories from like 3,000 calories a day to 2,000 calories a day. And while I was doing that, while I was losing this weight, I started to kind of re-examine the culture of Oklahoma City to try and figure out why I had become an example of Oklahoma City's biggest health issue, obesity. And I started to look at the way that we had constructed the city, and I realized, you know, this is a great place to live if you happen to be a car. But if you're a person, you're almost constantly at odds with the automobile. I mean, you try to cross our downtown streets. You know, we had this walk sign up, and you better run, because you know, our streets were so wide downtown, and we didn't get people long enough to get across. It was a very pedestrian, unfriendly environment. We lead the nation, apparently, in most fast food restaurants per capita. I don't know who figured that up. God bless them. But it only illustrates the culture of Oklahoma City, that your life revolves around the car. We didn't have a public transportation system we were proud of. And finally, when we determined there was taxation capacity to try and do something going forward, we started kind of devising ways to redesign the infrastructure. But first, we decided on a awareness campaign. And so on New Year's Day of 2007, I went to the zoo, and I stood in front of the elephants, and I said, this city is going on a diet, and we're going to lose 1 million pounds. And then all hell broke loose. The national media, really, to their credit, could have taken two responses to this. They could have thought to themselves, man, that city was so fat, the mayor had to put them on a diet. Or they could say, you know what, this is a problem everywhere, and this is a city that's choosing to do something about it. Fortunately, they took the latter. And the amount of earned media or media attention that we got, drawn attention to our website, thiscityisgoingonadiet.com, drove 150,000 people in one day. And over the next 4 years, I'll be doggone if the citizens didn't lose 1 million pounds. 47,000 people went to the website, pledged to lose weight. The website kind of gave them educational information, nutritional information. It showed how much weight they had lost when they put in their goal weight, and it kind of helped them go through the technology. But suddenly we had an opportunity to also start to change our infrastructure, because now we had kind of established, penetrated the message about how obesity was a problem and the infrastructure was part of the problem. And so through a series of initiatives, school bond issues, city bond issues, and MAPS 3, we're now constructing new gymnasiums in all of our inner city grade schools. We're building hundreds of miles of new sidewalks in Oklahoma City. We went through 40 years of not requiring developers to build sidewalks in Oklahoma City, and it shows. We're going back in now and putting them in record time. We're building over 100 miles of jogging and biking trails. We're building senior health and wellness centers throughout the community. We have a new public transportation streetcar that's coming in. It's fully paid for. We're building a large downtown Central Park, all with the idea of trying to get people outside and more active, and at the same time realizing that the obesity issue is mostly about what you eat and how much you eat, but certainly the city's infrastructure can play a part. In a sentence, we had designed the city around cars, and the new model, the new instructions for our Public Works Department is, no, we're going to design the city around people. Now figure out what that means, but we're not going to design it around cars anymore. We've seen where that's gotten us. We have gotten a lot of traction, a lot of attention in recent years for the infrastructure projects that we've invested in, and that the citizens go to the polls every so often and tax themselves to build stuff, really impressive stuff by other city standards around the country. And I think if there's a secret to what Oklahoma City has done, it's convinced the suburbanite that the quality of their life is directly related to the intensity of the core. And that's not instinctual. You think if you live in a suburban area 10 miles from downtown, that what you really care about most is your neighborhood. But people also realize that they care about their downtown. And they realize you can't be a suburb of nothing. We were trying to be a suburb of nothing. If you go back to downtown Oklahoma City in the early 1990s, there wasn't much there. Certainly after 5 o'clock, there wasn't much going on. From time to time, pushing one of these initiatives, I find myself nose to nose with a retired suburbanite who I'm trying to convince to vote yes. Now, there's usually 3 things that I'm pretty sure that they're convinced of. 1, they don't like downtown. 2, they don't like taxes. And 3, they don't like me. And when I've lost the intellectual argument, when I've given them all the great concepts and big picture perspectives of why this is important, when I've lost it on every turn, I close with this. I say, we're building a city where your kid and your grandkid are going to want to choose to live. And that one really bugs them because they know it's true. If they didn't see it in their house, they saw it in their cousin's house or their neighbor's house back in the 1980s, how we lost a generation of leadership, how we did not have the jobs to keep our young people. The Census Bureau now keeps track of all this stuff. We have more people from California moving into Oklahoma City than vice versa. We have more people from Texas moving to Oklahoma City than vice versa. It's undeniably that we have an impressive group of highly educated young people that's moving to Oklahoma City. You probably are aware, if you don't remember it reading it, back in the 1930s, John Steinbeck wrote a book about the grapes of wrath and how the generation of Oklahomans left to go west for opportunity. It now seems like what we're experiencing is the wrath of grapes. Their grandkids are coming home. And in Oklahoma City, we have experienced an incredible list of life experiences and city experiences like truly none other. And I travel the country now speaking on our story. And I think to truly understand Oklahoma City's ascension, you also have to understand the desperation of what Oklahoma City's people had been through, both from the economy and also from the bombing. And to a certain extent, that has got more people in Oklahoma City pulling on the same rope than any place you can imagine. But in the meantime, thank you for having me out here today. I've really enjoyed the opportunity to talk about Oklahoma City with you, and I know occasionally you get down to Oklahoma City, and we very much appreciate it. Hope you're treated well when you're there. Thank you.
Mayor Cornett, thank you for speaking to our club today, and thank you for all that you're doing to thunder up your city and the state. A book in your honor recognizing today's program will be presented to our partner in education, Celia Clinton Elementary. The book is Bear Says Thanks, and we say thank you, and then also big thanks to the Oklahoma City Rotarians for visiting with us today. Next week, we have Dr. Steve Turner, president of Northeastern State University. The following week, we'll meet at Celia Clinton Elementary. Remember your committee meeting. Have a great week. We are adjourned.